I didn't hear the wolves first. What made me stop was the strange silence of the landscape, the kind of silence that only exists when something is wrong. Ahead of me, the clearing opened wide, covered in untouched snow, reflecting the cold light of the Canadian sky. That's where I saw the movement. A slow circle forming, grey shadows cut against the white. Wolves, several of them, too visible, too close. At the center, completely exposed, was the puppy, small, dusted with snow, his body far too low for the cold of that place. One front paw was twisted to the side, and he could barely stay standing. When he tried to move, he slipped and fell again, letting out a thin cry that echoed across the clearing. The wolves didn't rush. They didn't attack. They walked in a semicircle, keeping exact distance. That wasn't chaos. It was control. Daylight made everything too clear to deny. I could see vapor leaving the puppy's mouth with every short breath. I could see the wolf's muscles shift beneath thick fur. I could see the focused eyes, not aggressive, but far too attentive. I took a slow step forward, feeling the snow sink under my boot. One of the wolves lifted its head and looked straight at me. It didn't growl. It didn't retreat. It just watched. And I understood that this simple decision, move forward or stop, had just pulled me into the story. If this story already has you hooked, leave a like, subscribe to the channel, and comment with the city and country you're watching from. It really helps the channel keep bringing stories like this. The cold wind swept through the clearing without resistance, carrying the metallic scent of dried blood from the puppy's injured paw. It wasn't a fresh wound, but it was enough to explain why he hadn't been able to escape. When I took another step, all the wolves adjusted at once, as if responding to an invisible command. None advanced, none retreated. The circle simply reshaped itself, keeping the puppy in the center and me at the edge. It was there, beneath that sky that felt too bright and that snow that felt too clean, that I realized how close I had come to the end of this story without knowing it. If I had arrived just a few minutes later, there would have been no chase, no struggle, no dramatic scene. The forest would have moved on. The puppy lifted his muzzle toward me and tried to bark. No bark came out, only a hoarse, exhausted sound. I lowered myself slowly, feeling the cold cut through my knee, and understood that this wouldn't be a simple rescue. It was a test, and it was only just beginning. I stood still for a few seconds, trying not to appear threatening. The clearing was too large to hide any movement and too small to allow mistakes. The puppy remained at the center, breathing fast, his body curled against the cold. The snow around him was already marked with overlapping tracks, small, chaotic prints mixed with the large, steady ones of the wolves. That told me he had already tried to escape and failed. The largest wolf took 2 steps forward, not toward the puppy, toward me. Its posture was upright, neck extended, tail low. It wasn't an attack, it was a warning. I stopped immediately, let my boots sink a little deeper into the snow, and kept my arms loose at my sides, showing I carried nothing. The cold wind moved freely through the clearing, lifting small whirlwinds of fine snow between us. The puppy tried to stand again. The paw gave out. He fell onto his side, letting out a louder whimper this time. The sound crossed the open space without resistance, and something shifted in the group. 2 wolves turned their heads at the same time. One lowered its muzzle, testing the air. There was no rush, but there was calculation. They knew time was on their side. I took a slow step sideways, trying to break the direct line between us. The larger wolf mirrored the movement, keeping the same angle. It didn't move closer, but it didn't allow me to advance either. This wasn't a chaotic standoff. It was a silent negotiation, carried out through distance, posture, and patience. The entire clearing seemed organized around that fragile balance. That's when I noticed something else. None of the wolves were watching me the entire time. Their focus shifted between the puppy, the surrounding area, and the open horizon of the forest. They weren't thinking only about the hunt. They were alert to something larger, as if they also knew this situation could spiral out of control at any moment. And for the first time since I arrived, I felt that I might not be the only one trying to keep this from ending badly. The cold was no longer the worst part. What truly weighed on me was the feeling of being stuck inside an equation that didn't depend on me alone. The clearing remained open and bright, with no shadows where anything could hide, and that left everything too exposed. The puppy, the wolves, me. There would be no surprise here. Every decision would be seen, measured, answered. The puppy was trembling so hard that the snow around his body seemed to vibrate with him. His breathing came short and uneven, forming small clouds of vapor that disappeared too quickly into the frozen air. He tried to drag himself a few inches forward, using only his back legs, but the effort was more than his body could handle. He stopped, lowered his head into the snow, and stayed there. That was the moment something inside me shifted. It wasn't courage. It was urgency, because I recognized that look. It wasn't pure panic. It was exhaustion, the kind that shows up when the body has already spent everything it had and is still being forced to go on. The wolves noticed too. The circle adjusted again, almost imperceptibly, as if they knew the exact minimum distance needed to maintain control without forcing the end. One of them sat down in the snow, relaxing his body, without taking his eyes off the center. Another began to walk slowly, drawing a tighter line. This wasn't desperate hunger, it was calculated waiting. I lowered myself slowly, keeping my body low, my movements wide and deliberate. The snow sank under my knees. The cold cut through my pants instantly, but I didn't move. Any sudden gesture now could be read as a broken agreement. I spoke softly, not to the wolves, but to the puppy. Not specific words, just sound, presence. The puppy lifted his head with effort and looked at me. His eyes were wet, dull but alive. He tried to bark again. Nothing came out. He only opened his mouth and closed it, as if the air had run out before the sound. One of the younger wolves took a step forward, curiosity barely contained. The largest reacted immediately, blocking the movement with his body. There was a brief growl. Low, internal, more correction than threat. That told me something important. There was hierarchy, control, intention. These animals weren't lost in their hunger. They were following invisible rules I would have to respect if I wanted to buy time. The wind carried the smell of the open forest, resin, snow, wet fur. It also carried the puppy's scent, dried blood, old fear, weakness, and invitation that would be hard for any predator to ignore, and yet they didn't advance. That led me to the most uncomfortable conclusion so far. The attack hadn't been cancelled. It had only been postponed. They were waiting for the moment when the puppy would no longer react, when the final effort would end on its own. I slid my hand slowly toward the radio clipped to my belt, then stopped before touching it. Any electronic sound in that open silence could change everything. There was no backup nearby, no team, no plan B. I was alone, kneeling in the snow, negotiating with a pack of wolves using nothing but posture, time, and something I wasn't even sure they recognized as intention. That's when I realized something that chilled me more than the wind. The wolves were no longer watching me as a threat. They were watching me as a variable, something new inside the scene, something that could alter the outcome for better or worse. One of them tilted his head slightly, as if trying to understand what I would do next. The largest kept his eyes fixed, alert, evaluating every minimal change in my body. The puppy let out an even weaker whimper, a short sound, almost nothing, the kind of sound that would go unnoticed if no one were listening. And in that instant, it became clear to me that I didn't have much time to think about safety, about protocol, about myself. The forest doesn't work at a human pace. It doesn't wait for long decisions. It advances when it senses weakness, or resolves things when it senses opportunity. I took a deep breath, feeling the frozen air burn inside my lungs, and did something I knew could change everything. I took one more step, toward the puppy. Not fast, not confident, just inevitable. The reaction was immediate. All the wolves stood at once. The circle tightened slightly. None of them ran, none attacked. But the space shrank, and for the first time since I entered the clearing, I felt with absolute clarity that I had reached the point of no return. Either I would find a way to cross that invisible line without breaking it, or this story would end right there, beneath a sky too bright, in a clearing too beautiful to hide what was about to happen. The step I took wasn't the most dangerous one. The most dangerous part came after, stopping. standing there between the puppy and the circle of wolves, neither advancing nor retreating, feeling the weight of the choice stretch through time. The clearing felt even larger now, too open, as if there were nowhere to run even if I wanted to. The puppy remained on the ground, breathing with difficulty, his small body stark against the endless white around him. Snow had begun to cling to his fur, forming small plates of ice that revealed how long he had been there. The largest wolf took another step toward me. It wasn't fast, it wasn't aggressive, it was final. The distance between us was now short enough for me to see details, an old scar across the muzzle, lighter fur along the neck, the way he distributed his weight with absolute precision. He stopped, upright, filling the space with his body. It wasn't a direct threat. It was a block. This is as far as you go. I stayed still. My heart was pounding too loudly, but my body understood that any exaggerated reaction could be read as either flight or attack. I glanced at the puppy. He was fighting to stay awake, blinking slowly, as if the world were becoming too heavy to hold. That's when I noticed something I hadn't seen before. The wolves weren't positioned only around the puppy. They were positioned around me as well. Not as an immediate ambush, but as containment. They didn't want me to advance, and they didn't want me to retreat too quickly either. The wind crossed the clearing, again lifting fine snow and spreading scent in all directions. One of the wolves farther back raised his muzzle and released a low, brief growl, almost an internal signal. The largest answered with a minimal movement of the head. Order maintained, absolute control. That realization hit hard. They were calmer than I was, more organized, more prepared to wait. I lowered myself again, slowly, until I was almost level with the puppy. I extended my open hand, not toward him, but into the space between us, as if offering something invisible. I spoke again in a low, continuous voice, without specific words. The puppy reacted by lifting his head slightly, eyes struggling to focus. One of the wolves took a half step forward, and the largest blocked him again. There was a second of pure, compressed tension, the kind where everything could change. Then something happened that I didn't expect. The puppy, gathering what little strength he had left, dragged his body a few inches toward me. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't fast, it was desperate, almost pitiful, but full of intention. His injured paw slipped. He nearly collapsed onto his side, but he kept going. The distance closed by his choice, not mine. The effect was immediate. The wolves' circle broke for the first time, slightly, subtly, but real. Two of them shifted at once, out of sync. The largest turned his head, reassessing the new positions. For the first time since I entered the clearing, I felt that something had changed the original equation. The puppy was no longer just the passive center of the scene. He had made a decision. I stopped thinking. I leaned forward with extreme care and touched the puppy with the tips of my fingers. His fur was far too cold, his body far too light. He didn't react with fear. He only let out a short, weak sound and pressed his muzzle against my hand, as if that contact alone were enough to keep him there a little longer. The wolves reacted to the touch, all of them. The largest lunged one sharp step forward. A deeper growl rose from his chest, echoing across the clearing. I froze, my hand still resting on the puppy. I didn't pull away. I didn't move closer. I simply stayed. The wolf stopped less than 2 meters away. His eyes locked onto mine, intense, evaluating something that wasn't strength or fear. He was evaluating intention. The silence that followed was almost physical, heavy, thick, the kind of silence that comes before decisions that can't be undone. The puppy struggled to breathe beneath my hand. The cold was beginning to steal the little warmth he had left. I knew I couldn't let go of him. I also knew that lifting him into my arms in that instant could be the wrong trigger. And there, kneeling in the snow, with a puppy too alive to die and wolves too alert to yield, I understood the final truth of that moment. Rescue wouldn't depend on strength or courage. It would depend on resisting the urge to force an ending, to make space for something that hadn't happened yet, and I had no idea what the wolves would do next. Time began to stretch in a strange way, not like minutes, but like layers. Each breath the puppy took seemed to open a new space between now and whatever came next. My hand remained resting on his small body, feeling the cold seep through his skin, feeling the faint movement of his chest rising and falling. There was still life there, but it was fragile, unstable, on the edge of giving in. The wolves didn't move, they didn't advance, they didn't retreat. The largest remained in front, body firm, paws planted deep in the snow, as if he had decided that this spot was the final boundary. I slowly raised my eyes and met the wolf's gaze directly for the first time. Not in challenge, in recognition. He didn't look away. His eyes were ancient, deep, unhurried, a gaze that didn't need to prove anything. There was no hatred there, no cruelty. There was continuous evaluation. I was being measured not as an immediate threat, but as something new, disrupting the balance of the scene, something that had not yet been accepted or rejected. The puppy shifted beneath my hand and let out a louder whimper. The Kisu sound crossed the open clearing and reached the tree line beyond. Two of the wolves farther back lifted their heads at the same time. One took a hesitant step forward. The largest reacted with a sharp, dry growl, more command than warning, order restored. But I felt it. They were at their limit too. The cry stirred something that even hierarchy couldn't fully control. That's when I did the riskiest thing so far. I didn't stand. I didn't pull the puppy toward me. I simply slid my other hand carefully beneath his small body, supporting him slightly, taking some weight off the injured paw. The puppy reacted immediately, leaning into me, searching for warmth. The contact was minimal, but enough to change everything. The largest wolf stepped forward again. Now the distance was too short for error. I could hear his breathing, slow and deep. I could see the vapor rising from his muzzle. The growl came again, lower now, vibrating in the cold air. I froze. Any movement at this point could be read as an attempt to flee. I stayed exactly where I was, supporting the puppy, speaking softly, steadily, without stopping. And then the wolf stopped. It wasn't a retreat. It was a pause. He held his position, eyes shifting between me and the puppy. One of the younger wolves approached from the side, curious, but was halted by a simple flick of the tail. Once again, control. But something was different now. The largest tilted his head slightly, as if trying to understand why the puppy was no longer just on the ground, why he wasn't crying anymore, why the sound had changed. The puppy stopped whimpering, not because he was better, but because he was being held. That was decisive. The sound that attracted attention, that accelerated time, was gone. The clearing slipped into a different rhythm, slower, less urgent. I could feel it in the wolves' bodies, in the way their muscles relaxed just enough not to advance. Minutes passed, or seconds. It was hard to tell. The wind continued to move freely. The sky remained bright, indifferent to the small drama unfolding below. My leg began to ache, numbness creeping upward. But I didn't move, I couldn't, not while that fragile balance still held. Then I heard it, distant but unmistakable, the sound I had been waiting for from the beginning, not loud, not close, an engine, far away, very far, but real. A vehicle on the main trail breaking the open silence of the forest. The wolves reacted instantly, heads lifted. The largest turned his body slightly, evaluating the new variable. This wasn't part of the original equation. I knew time was up, not because the wolves were about to attack, but because the situation was about to change irreversibly. If the sound approached too fast, it could trigger panic, flight, attack. If it took too long, the puppy wouldn't last. I took a deep breath, adjusted my body with extreme care, and made the decision I had been postponing. Since the very first moment, it was now or never. I prepared to lift the puppy into my arms, and when I did, the largest wolf reacted. When I pulled the puppy against my chest, it wasn't fast. It was a continuous, calculated movement, almost ceremonial. The small body was far too light, far too warm, far too fragile for that place. The puppy curled in immediately, pressing his muzzle into my jacket as if recognizing this as his last chance to keep breathing, and it was at that exact moment that the largest wolf advanced. He didn't run, he didn't attack. He moved forward with 2 firm, heavy steps, the snow sinking beneath his paws. The growl rose stronger now, open, vibrating through the clear air of the clearing. The other wolves shifted with him, closing the space. The circle no longer existed. This was a line. Being tested, I stopped. I remained standing, but completely still. The puppy trembled in my arms, but he didn't cry anymore. The sound was gone. There was only the wind, the vapor of breath, and that low, continuous growl, a final warning. I knew that any step back could be read as flight, any step forward as provocation, so I did the only thing I hadn't tried yet. I knelt. I lowered myself slowly into the snow, keeping the puppy visible, but protected. I didn't hide him. I didn't lift him higher. I simply showed, with my entire body, that I wasn't running with him, that I wasn't hunting, that I wasn't challenging anything. The wolf stopped a few meters away, his eyes fixed on me, then on the puppy, then back on me. The distant engine came a little closer, still far enough not to shatter everything at once. The wolves felt it too. The largest turned his head for a second, evaluating the open forest behind me, evaluating routes, time, risk, and then it happened. The largest wolf released a short howl, not loud, not long, a dry, direct call. The others answered almost immediately, but none advanced. On the contrary, one by one, they began to retreat, not running, not defeated, retreating like those who accept that this scene had ended. Differently, the largest was the last to move. Before turning away, he looked at me one final time. There was no threat there, no anger, only something I will never be able to fully explain, a recognition of limit. Then he turned and followed the others, disappearing into the trees as if he had never been there. The silence that remained wasn't the same as before. It wasn't tense. It was open, the kind of silence that comes after something large has passed. The vehicle arrived minutes later. A colleague jumped out, stopped when he saw the scene, and managed to say only one thing. "You got there in time." I shook my head, but didn't answer. Because it wasn't true. I hadn't arrived in time. I had arrived at the last possible instant. The puppy was taken immediately for treatment. Hypothermia, dehydration, infection in the paw. Serious, but reversible. In the days that followed, I followed every update, every small improvement, every steadier breath. He survived. Weeks later, fully recovered, the puppy was adopted by a local family. Just a regular dog now, running in backyards, sleeping in the sun, living a life that almost never existed. Sometimes, when I pass near that stretch of forest, I stop for a second and look at the open clearing, bright, silent, and I think about how that story could have ended without anyone ever seeing it. No scream, no struggle, no hero. But it ended differently because that day, someone resisted the urge to rush the ending and chose to hold life carefully until danger lost its meaning. And that saved everything.